Bear with me, I'm hitting the live stream. Okay, let's see, record. And well, welcome all. My name is George Kiki, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of LebNet, and I will be moderating this session today. First, let me go through some housekeeping items. Let me try to share the slide here for a second. So basically, we're all of you, the participants, are going to be joining through video. You're actually muted. If you have any logistics issues, please chat directly with Najib Khouri Haddad, who's going to be facilitating this in the background. Additionally, Najib is going to be looking at your Q&A questions. Please submit any Q&A questions in the chat, in the Q&A box, and that will be curated and moderated lately at the end of the session. Najib will actually take care of that, and we're actually recording this session as well as live streaming it on YouTube. So if any of your friends connect with you and tell you we can't get in, just tell them to go to the LebNet YouTube channel, and they can follow there. So without further ado, let me go to the next slide and show our panel today. So this webinar on AI solutions and how they're impacted by COVID-19 is a third in a series of webinars that LebNet is organizing to keep our stakeholders engaged, at least until we can resume our in-person events. These continue to be extraordinary times we live in, and the new normal presents many challenges and opportunities. AI solutions, like many others, are deeply affected. So the question is, which applications will see delays? Which areas will see accelerated adoption? We will try to shed some light today on how some organizations are adapting and innovating during this pandemic and beyond. We're extremely pleased to bring you today's session on AI, and I want to personally thank our panelists for making the time out of their busy schedule. We have Johnny Gabriel. He's VP of Data Science and Solution Architecture at Beyond. Anthony Tayoun is co-founder and COO, as well as CFO at Dex AI Robotics. And George Stroud, VP of Product at Casisto. George, thank you again as you're on London, UK time, and it's 8 p.m. your time right now. So thank you for making the time so late in the evening.
My pleasure, guys.
Great. So next, I'm gonna be asking each of the panelists to introduce themselves. They're gonna be sharing a couple of slides to do that. So they're gonna describe what their company does, as well as what they do. And please, also for the panelists, if you're not talking, if you can also mute yourselves, there's a little bit of feedback. Okay, so without further ado, Johnny, can you please briefly introduce yourself and describe what your firm focuses on? And I'm sharing your slides right now.
Thank you, George. Thanks everyone for being here. My name is Johnny Gabriel. I'm the Vice President of Data Science and Business Solution Architecture at Beyond. As George mentioned, we're in the telecom space. What we focus on, just a high-level view, is we focus on using AI for automating analytical tasks that occur within a telecommunications operator. Obviously, it's a huge web of pipes and fiber and antennas and spectrum and all these things, and it obviously connecting people today. Our goal has been to apply AI for operational automation, and one of the key things we focus on is amid all of the technology that's involved in delivering connectivity to people is making the focus on people. So we'll talk about the impact of COVID and all the things that occur in a telecommunications network to get the bits and bytes from one place to the next, but making sure we measure what happens to the end customer is effectively what Beyond is focused on. If we go to the next slide, George, for today, the the focus obviously is on COVID and the impact of that on telecommunications. And it's obviously a hard time for everyone, but we'll talk a little bit about the telecom operators. I think is one of the few beneficiaries of COVID. Overnight, all of our personal interactions have somehow transformed onto internet interactions, like today's panel, which we've done in person before. The picture in the background actually is our latest happy hour. It's the same way I spent my Easter this year, pretty much the same way. My dad, who's in his 70s, spent his first virtual Easter this year due to COVID. But all of it obviously is running on these mobile and fixed networks, and these companies have now become the lifeline for we've always been connected recently, but this is a different time for them for sure. If we go to the next slide, if you don't mind, George. So at a high level, what has been the impact? As I mentioned, I mean, obviously it brings challenges. There's a lot more stress on these networks. It's transformed from, business has moved from, a lot of condensed fixed sites to where everybody distributed to their homes. There's lower customer touch points where you before used to call for the technician to come and wiggle the cable at your house. Now you want them nowhere close. So moving into self-support and changing the operational models has been definitely challenging. And no surprise that the internet traffic has spiked, right? 25% on average for major cities. And, cities, like countries like South Korea, maybe not so much impact, but like Southern Italy has seen a 40% spike, which is, astronomical if you think the scale of how these networks are built. But there has been actually, when I said beneficiaries in the sense that it's been a compelling event for a lot of things that the telecom industry has been waiting for, from releasing spectrum to allow more mobile applications to, reducing regulations for building out bigger capacity for these networks. It has sort of sparked a lot of urgency on things that have been in the back burner for a while. So there's pluses and minuses, but in the end, with COVID, the main focus has been on making sure people stay connected. I think so far they've done actually a phenomenal job. I personally would have expected a lot more disruption, but so far, it's held up pretty well. So we're happy to be part of those solutions as well.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to George Stroud at Casisto. George, you want to please introduce yourself and your company?
Thank you, George. Yeah, sure thing. Thank you, George, and thanks for the intro. And obviously, thank you for everyone who's joining in for this discussion. My name is George Stroud. I'm the VP of Product at Casisto. We could switch to the next slide, George, if you don't mind. A little bit of background on Casisto. We are essentially the leaders in conversational AI in financial services. And our mission is to humanize digital experiences in financial services. And effectively what this means is we want to empower people to get answers in real time from their banks, in the most natural way possible to any questions, banking questions that they have. And that's really through natural language. So whether it's through speech or through text, we want to allow banks to better service their customers and improve the digital experiences of people on their channels, right, through natural language. Our virtual assistant, Kai, has been deployed in 16 different countries with leading financial institutions. Across North America, we're live with JP Morgan, TD Bank, Manulife in Canada. In Asia, we're live in Singapore, India, and Indonesia with DBS. We're live in Hong Kong and with Standard Chartered. We're live across Africa in 9 different countries with APSA. We're even live in the Middle East with Emirates NBD and Liv, the mobile-only digital bank in the UAE. Really just in terms of our product suite, we cater to consumer banking, corporate banking, investment management. These are kind of our 3 core products. But the large majority of our offerings so far in our live deployments have been in the consumer banking space and with a focus on text as being the primary way of communication. And so just to give you an idea of scale, we have answered, Kai has answered over 35 million banking questions so far. And as you can imagine, this is a gold mine of data, right? It's a gold mine that's growing at a rate of 1 million utterances per month. there's 18 million people that have engaged and interacted with Kai. And really, this puts us in a unique position to understand how people are engaging differently with their financial institutions during this unique time, and the role that VAs can play in a time of crisis. I'll cover some of the business outcomes that financial institutions are seeing from deployments of VA next. But if you don't mind, George, if we could switch to the next slide. I want to spend some time just covering just high level the impact that we're seeing in our industry from the crisis. It's clear that call centers have been completely disrupted, right? Whether you're calling an airline, your bank, your healthcare provider, wait times are often over an hour. And there's really two factors that are leading to this. On one side, call volumes are up by 30%, but on the other hand, another big consequence of the severe lockdown measures that have been taken across the planet is that agent capacity in call centers has dropped by 60%. So, really, a lot of companies have outsourced their call center operations to places like the Philippines, India, and people simply can't go to work, right? And most of those people, unfortunately, are not equipped with flexible work from home policies due to various data privacy issues. And they're not equipped with the right technology solutions to be able to continue to service customers, in this situation. So just in terms of what we're seeing, in our VAs, with people that are actually engaging with our virtual assistant during this time, we've generally seen an increase in by 35% in just the overall usage between February and April. People are naturally going to the virtual assistant to engage with their banks. And it is clear that there's a real shift in just the nature of those conversations that are happening. This is not business as usual. People are genuinely concerned. They're asking for help. They're asking for reassurance. We're seeing things like, is it safe to touch an ATM? How often do you clean your ATM? How have branch hours been impacted, right? These are the types of questions that people are asking. And this was kind of like at the beginning of the crisis. And then, it quickly evolved into questions related, to deferrals of payments, whether it's an interest payment on a card, on a loan, and so forth, right? So generally, we've seen, drops in types of questions related to, new products, new services. These used to represent a significant part of what we used to see in terms of conversations with our virtual assistant. These have dropped by 20%. We're seeing people ask for remittances, how to make payments, how to wire transfers. They obviously want to reach to their loved ones and essentially get help making those payments. It's clear that these are difficult times for most people, right? And my hope is that with conversational AI, businesses will have the tools that they need to better service their customers in times like these, and that people will be empowered to ultimately get help anytime and anywhere with the right tools.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to move to Anthony right now with, I'm assuming, Anthony, is Dex AI, right? Or is it Dexi?
We leave it up for interpretation.
Oh, wow. Okay.
All right. Thanks, George. Thanks, everyone who's on the panel. My name is Anthony Tayoun. I'm the co-founder and COO of Dexi Robotics. The reason we leave it open for interpretation, Dex AI is a portmanteau for dexterous artificial intelligence, but at the same time, the word Dexi means catch in Greek. So it's kind of a wordplay on both. And so Dexi, what we do at Dexi is we use robotic arms to automate food preparation in existing restaurants. So what you see here on the slide is a robotic arm with a computing cabinet at the bottom and a few accessories. And if you imagine a restaurant like Chipotle or Sweetgreen or really any place that has a serving line or an assembly-based food product, these robots can be placed on that kitchen counter, you plug it in, and it just works, right? And the beauty of it is that it just works, right? It will never call sick. It will not contact COVID. It will not pass it along. And you get all these nice benefits of the robot making consistent recipes all the time. We'll get more about into the benefits in a bit. Now let's go over how does this actually work, right? And so on this slide here, you see on the left-hand side, Alfrid, which is what we call the robot, preparing a salad out of a group of ingredients in a bin. And so the way this works, the robot has a camera on the wrist, and that camera allows the robot to work with any layout, so it can identify where the ingredients are. Next, it picks up the right utensil, so whether it's a spoon, tongue, disher, and manipulates the utensil and uses the utensil to do the third step, which is picking the ingredient. And we use artificial intelligence and machine learning across each of these steps. Some of them are a little bit more difficult to do than others, specifically being able to manipulate deformable materials. So think things like guacamole, right? Being able to scoop guacamole is an extremely difficult task, especially for robots. And as you probably all guess, in today's world, this is very important because everyone's got to eat, right? We all need to eat, and people are having more and more, the health perception with COVID is increasingly preventing people from going to restaurants, and we'll touch on that in a sec as well. So, we're offering this robotic solution for restaurants. How does it actually help them? And there are a few benefits for what restaurants get. First of all, we charge a pay-as-you-go model. So we don't charge anything upfront. We charge only a commission or a revenue share for every item that the robot makes. So for example, what you saw earlier with the robot making a salad, we would charge that restaurant a 10% on the price of that salad for everyone that the robot does, which is significantly cheaper than what they pay today. Similarly, the robots will always serve you the same portion, right? If you want 2 grams of rice, they're always going to give you 2 grams of rice. They're not going to over or under scoop. They're pretty fast. So 50 orders per robot per hour, which is around 10 to 20% faster than a person. And as I said earlier, it takes basically no change to implement and set up. And you can imagine how that's very important in today's conditions, where the whole world turned upside down, restaurants were affected more than anyone else. And what we have on the next slide is really the depth of the effect, or a few examples of the effects of COVID on restaurants today. And I'll go over those quickly now, but then we'll get back to them, I'm hoping, throughout the conversation as well. So first of all, there's reduced revenues, mainly because of social distancing, preventing people from going to restaurants. But even beyond the immediate term, in the long term, social distancing and just the fear of such viruses will mean that restaurants will have fewer tables per store, just to distance them, which necessarily means that revenues have to go down structurally. At the same time, delivery hasn't picked up as we expected. And so restaurants are forced to cut costs, right? You can't increase your revenues, they're going down, you're forced to cut costs. Shifting gears a little bit, customer perception has changed quite a bit, and I'm pretty sure many of the people on this webinar right now share these thoughts, right? So people are scared of disease transmission at restaurants, be it between kitchen staff or from kitchen staff to customers. Foodborne illnesses have always been a problem with us, and if anything, COVID kind of shone a light on that and how dangerous and big of a problem that is. And so automation is also a favorable solution to remove those risks. And lastly, there are some operational changes that are inevitable due to the scale of something like COVID, right? So just like George mentioned earlier, people are asking, is it safe to touch ATMs? I'm pretty sure a lot of you are thinking, is it safe for me to go to a salad bar and touch a spoon that 50 other people just touched before me? And so that creates a push for change. It reduces adoption friction on the customer side, particularly restaurants. And it offers this great window of opportunity where people are more amenable to trying new things. And it's on us to show them the new things that they can use to push these technologies forward. So that was the overview I wanted to give, and then hopefully we can touch on more of these things in a bit.
Great, thanks, Anthony. Okay, now that we kind of heard a little bit of overview about your companies, let's come back a bit to what we're sort of the common topic is, which is AI or artificial intelligence and machine learning. So can you elaborate, each one of you, and I'll start with Johnny, can you elaborate on how AI is specifically implemented in your field and how critical such implementations are to your sector. So this is not necessarily for beyond, but the sector of telecom, and just give folks a flavor of how AI is implemented.
Yeah, certainly. So obviously, there's not a whole lot of need to spend too much time on sort of mentioning the scale for the operators today. I mean, if we just look at wireless operators, we have 3 today, right, in the US, each at a scale of 100 million customers, just for mobility. The operational landscape for such a massive operation, especially when you have a very layered type of setup, you know, the networks, everything from, you know, cables underground all the way to the last mile, antennas, radio, etc. So the operational structure of networks is inherently very complex, but at the same time, it is very structured, which lends itself extremely well to machine learning and AI. Plus, there's a slew of standards and support bodies that help facilitate this. So I'll give you a couple of examples in the sense of just sort of ground it a little bit. Take, for example, 911 calls that happen. One of the things that telecom operators have to do is obviously they have to support your 911 calls, right? And this has to happen under any circumstances, whether you have coverage, whether you don't have coverage, whether you're roaming, no matter what. So every device and every piece of equipment that goes on the network needs to be certified end to end to ensure that that happens. And this applies to every other service, but, you know, just taking one example. So, and again, think about the hundreds of millions of customers that go through this. Where AI plays a role is in the ability, one, to ensure that the procedural tasks that need to happen in order to get these devices and equipment onboarded, all has to be tested very rigorously, all has to be analyzed for every minute detail, and all of that, we utilize machine learning and AI in order to execute. On the other hand, obviously, again, now there's a lot of performance sensitive and business critical applications that obviously run on these connected networks. One of the things we have to do, as you know, George knows very well about this, exactly that there has been an extreme spike in calls to care. And there's absolutely no way to be able to manage that kind of volume. There's no way to be able to react at the pace that's required to each one of those incidents. So we apply AI to basically prevent that call from coming in the first place, detecting ongoing issues that occur in the network autonomously without the need for intervention, ensuring that there's a resolution that is predicted, the impact is identified. So, for example, something happens on a core element within the network. Who is it going to impact? Where are they? How bad is the impact going to be? All of this is predictive measurements that have to take place. And then identifying why it happened, what is the corrective action that can take place, notifying customers, telling them what possible impact could be to them, what could they expect, and also feeding downstream applications such as virtual assistants, customer care agents, et cetera, providing the right information that can be responded to. So these are just a few of the examples, but the way to think about it is, again, what we're trying to do constantly with machine learning and AI is prevent incidents from happening. And when they do happen, make sure that the resolution and the impact is resolution is accelerated, impact is minimized, and disseminate the right information.
Great. George, you want to take a shot at the same question, please?
Yeah, of course. So how do we build a successful virtual assistant, right? And it starts really with data, right? Having a lot of labeled training data that's very domain specific to be able to train models that understand what people are going to ask you, right? You need really specialized domain, deep domain expertise with very specific data to be able to do that, right? So just to take an example, something as simple as asking for what's my balance, right? You can have thousands of variances for asking what's my balance. You could say, what's my balance? How much money do I have? How much do I have? What's in my account? How much do I owe? It's really about having that depth of data around a very specific domain and intent, in this case, like the balance inquiry intent, that gets you there. And that's really the primary differentiator when it comes to Kasisto. Kai is effectively pre-trained with millions of banking-specific utterances. It has hundreds of intents out of the box. These are all grouped into skills that our virtual assistant is able to handle upfront. So that's on the NLU machine learning side, right? Now, in addition to this, what you need is essentially pre-configured reference conversational flows to get certain things done. So now that you've understood that somebody's asking you about activating a card, you need to be able to capture their card number, their expiration date, the CVV, get the card activated, right? And that's really what comes out of the box with a product like Kai in the case of Kasisto's virtual assistant. Now, there's plenty of frameworks out there, chatbot frameworks that would allow you to stand up a quick virtual assistant. You could use Dialogflow, you could use Power VA from Microsoft. But the reality is that it's unlikely that these are going to get you to a full enterprise-grade commercial deployment of a virtual assistant that's able to handle the hundreds of intents that you need in an actual deployment and the volumes that you're going to get in terms of variety of questions that are going to be thrown at it. Some people have built it themselves and very successfully. Bank of America specifically is a good example with Erica, their virtual assistant, but they spend a lot of time and resources to get there and to do it right. With Kasisto, you essentially get this solution, this product out of the box that gets you 80% there from day one and allows you as an organization to focus your energy on optimizing the 20% to kind of meet your specific needs.
Great. Anthony, robotics, really? AI? Which is a very obvious thing. Could you please elaborate again for those of us?
For sure. And I'll touch on the AI side for both the food industry and then robotics, because I think they're quite different. So starting with the food industry first, the food industry has been lagging way behind in basically any technology adoption, right? And a few examples that we can think of recently, McDonald's paid $100 million to build kiosks, touchscreens. Just please picture this with me. This is a tablet that you punch a bunch of buttons and you get an order, right? They paid $100 million to get that. And so I think that reflects just how much the industry was lagging in terms of technology adoption, technology capability, in-house ability to incorporate things like AI and ML. And for the last decade, maybe, all of the work in AI applications in the food industry has been in small impact optimization solutions, right? So things like, how do we make scheduling easier and more automated? How do we fix our operations in such a way to save 0.5% from our costs, right? Very small boxed initiatives that are optimization based. There's been a little bit of work on the delivery side, especially with some of the assistants that both Johnny and George touched on. They were implemented in the food context. So you would order on a phone with an AI-enabled assistant, for instance. However, not much more than that has been done. Recently, what has changed in the last few years is that we're seeing more and more hardware that is enabled by AI into the kitchens, right? So things from smart ovens that can detect the food that's being cooked in them and has, a non-linear distribution of heat, such that you can cook multiple things at the same time without having to worry about things need to cook faster than others. And most recently, we're starting to open this box of truly flexible end-to-end automation. And Dexai is one of the first solutions that can do that. And by that, I mean solutions that can be placed in a restaurant and truly unlock the AI capability of, you don't have to think where you place the plate because the robot can figure that out. You don't have to think on whether you put the tomatoes or the cucumbers because the camera and the vision is good enough to know that. And all of these technologies are finally starting to come together to enable a lot of AI applications in food specifically. Now, robotics, on the other hand, is also having a great time right now. And that's mainly due to advancements on the hardware and on the software side. So on the software side, for the first time, we're able to do things with computer vision. We're able to do things with path planning that let robots move like smoothly, as opposed to the clunky machines that we used to see on movies growing up. Same thing with hardware. The cost of hardware robotics is dropping 10 to 20% a year, making it finally financially attractive in a lot of large automation solutions. And I think the last piece with robotics that really unlocked the power of robotics is collaborative robots. So again, for the first time, we're moving from putting robots in cages and having people very far away from them to being able to work next to robots, with people interacting with these robots, giving feedback to them, and truly interacting with them on a day-to-day operational basis.
If I can add just a quick thing that George mentioned also, that's extremely important in the context of AI for all of our spaces, which is the subject matter expertise contribution when it comes to AI. I think it's hugely undervalued. I'll give an example. We sometimes actually with customers, especially where there's, to your point, Anthony, where there has been limited adoption of AI, there's this almost surreal understanding of what AI is supposed to be. And when you explain the importance of subject matter expertise and humans in the loop, it automatically somehow feels like you have to defend it. When in fact, it's actually a strong point and you see that, honestly, I see that for me personally, I see it a lot in a lot of the startups, where you look at the structure of the hiring that happens, where you see, it's a company of 25 people split, 20 data scientists and 15 others. And that balance always is a red flag for me, because the importance of the subject matter expertise and the training of these AI components is extremely valuable. And it's almost like it created a rush on, George, we've talked about this, it's created a rush on data scientists similar to the toilet paper rush that's happened from COVID, where basically it's panic hiring. But really, AI does not scale like regular development. It scales based on the number of problems you're trying to solve, but your scale in terms of how well you solve that problem is actually done on the subject matter expertise, your data labeling, your data cleansing, your data curation. But you can have one data scientist solve a very good problem for you if you provide the right data that you can provide. So I think just in general, when it comes to AI, especially in our space, I feel like the subject matter expertise is extremely undervalued.
So Johnny, let me interrupt for a second. When you say subject matter expertise, do you mean industry knowledge? That's what you mean, correct?
Correct, yes.
In other words, not just being an AI expert, but rather also understanding what problems you're trying to solve in this specific industry.
Yeah, correct, yes.
Right. And I want to, and I think you heard me say that before, about a year ago or so, when MIT created their, I think, AI labs or this, they got a big endowment. I think it was in the billions, or it was $1 billion actually, to build their AI department. I went to their website, and interestingly enough, they said that they want to make sure their students become bilingual. And by bilingual, they meant understanding AI as a technology and understanding a specific industry. And that's what they meant by bilingual. So to your point, that's very critical. And I think a lot of people miss that. And I just get someone who just knows how to code or who has taken AI classes and assuming they can solve an industry problem. So let me keep you, Johnny, because I'm going to ask you the next question. So again, tell us, and I think you addressed that a bit, but how has your industry in general and your company specifically reacted to COVID-19? Have you had to merely adapt, or has there been major pivots in your direction? And again, I don't talk about working remotely or all the basic hygiene stuff we all have to go through, but rather from a product perspective or some sort of a pivot that you might have done.
Yeah, no, I think in general the hesitation for AI in areas that has not been traditionally implemented has been reduced quite a bit, I think, and part of it, again, like I mentioned, I feel like COVID has accelerated a lot of the initiatives around AI and its adoption, in the sense that we've been preaching, obviously, because we're an AI company, about how certain things simply cannot be done without AI. So there's certain scale that you simply cannot achieve with the sort of primarily manual operations that existed before. And of course, we're delivering that message, but we're sort of self-serving in the sense. But now, finally, we feel like people are starting to recognize that, look, this issue has hit us in a way that it's true. We simply cannot scale. And I really like the use case of the virtual assistant, because it's one of those things that has, I can imagine the spike in dependency on it is absolutely astronomical, because again, we're sort of before that contact with the customer. We're trying to minimize the load on those virtual and real assistants that exist. Now, in terms of whether we've had to pivot, not particularly in the sense, but we do see a shift in terms of the interest in use cases. We work across the whole domain, but the closer it is to basically reducing that impact of the distribution of customers, the reduction in mobility, the deconcentration of data, there's a lot of interest in those use cases. But to give one example, like that I mentioned earlier, something called truck rolls is essentially when they have to send a technician to your house for a repair. Those are almost dead completely, right? When it was a major functional component. So now the idea of maximizing the accuracy of when you actually have to send a technician to the site by using AI in order to identify the most likely cause or resolution to a problem has increased dramatically. Now it's an absolute need. It's not just about operationally improving your bottom line by X%. It's about, I have to do this, otherwise there's no way I can scale.
Great. George, you want to take a shot again about AI and how your industry is, I'm sorry, how you're adapting to COVID, I apologize. Oh, you're muted, sorry.
Sorry, guys. Yeah, Johnny was spot on. I mean, we have seen a spike in the demand for VAs, and as a result of this crisis, and it is self-serving, but that's the reality, and it's honestly not just us. I don't always talk. I usually avoid trying to talk about competitors, but LivePerson released their earnings just recently. They talked about a spike in demand. Nuance released their earnings, just recently, and they talked about a spike in sales, right? And so it's really across the board. But I want to answer this question also from the perspective of how Kasisto, essentially reacted to COVID specifically, and not just the broader industry, because we'll get back to that. In the case of Kasisto, as I said, I mean, we're constantly monitoring usage of our VAs very closely. And I gave a few examples earlier about the types of conversations and interactions that were coming in. And it's despite all of the talk about self-learning, deep learning, as Johnny said, I mean, at the end of the day, it does take a human in the loop to do supervised machine learning today, for commercially reliable deployments of a virtual assistant, and that's what we do. So. We have teams of annotators that are constantly labeling data, analyzing data. And we are essentially retraining, retooling our models to constantly improve their performance and improve their coverage. And in the case of COVID, what we ended up doing specifically around this, as soon as we started seeing this thousands of interactions coming in that are COVID related across the world, is we created an extension to our product, a new COVID skill, if you will, that handles 6 specific intents and topics: general inquiries around COVID, payment deferrals, questions related to branch hours and impacts that there have been impacts to branch as a result of COVID, questions related to interest rates, questions related to travel insurance and people asking for refunds on canceled flights, questions related to healthcare insurance and coverage for that from the financial institutions that were essentially offering this as well. All of this was coming, as live data streams in our virtual assistants, and we had to quickly react to it and effectively, quickly bootstrap a new model that supports that skill. And that's what we did. I mean, we did it in a matter of weeks. We ultimately extended this as a free add-on to all of our customers globally. And we had really great reception from that, and actually I could share an example of a major bank in the US, TD Bank, that launched this new skill, in a matter of weeks, right? I mean, this is essentially a major bank being able to go live with an AI-powered virtual assistant, live commercial deployment in weeks, answering, and that VA answering thousands of interactions every day, right? So that's how we reacted to it.
Great. Anthony, do you want to tell us a little bit again about how you've adapted to COVID and what are some, if there are any major pivots that you had to do because of it? Anthony? Anthony, can you hear me? Oops.
Yep, Sir mentioned earlier, we had a spike, and also, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, you're coming in a little bit cut up. I don't know what's going on. That happened before, even when you were talking. So I don't know if there's anything in the background on your PC that's running or whatever. You might want to kill it. But go ahead. We can hear you now. Go ahead.
Cool. Thanks. This is also another new use case to explore in the age of COVID.
Yes.
Dropped packets. I think for for us specifically, it's a little bit similar to what George and Johnny mentioned, right? So we've seen a lot of uptake in demand, and also the use cases changed a little bit, and that led us to do a slight pivot on positioning, but also a slight pivot on the long-term roadmap. So for positioning, pre-COVID, the restaurant industry in the US had a huge labor gap, right? So there was far fewer laborers available than what is needed. 75% of restaurants were understaffed. With COVID, 66% of restaurant staff were laid off. So this is definitely not a problem anymore, right? However, the problem is the restaurants can't pay for these people anymore, can't pay the payroll because revenues went down. Requirement rather than helping growth. The other long-term positioning is our roadmap was to first start doing the assembly products, so salads, bowls, and so on, but then eventually move to grilling, frying, and other kitchen activities. However, as I mentioned earlier, because things like salad bars and buffets were highly affected due to COVID, we realized that there's a much larger market opportunity there now. And so we decided to pursue that as well. I think both of these things, if I take a step back and think about them, what happened in the restaurant industry is that the name of the game changed from optimization to survival, right? And that led to a lot of things to change in the AI context. So as Johnny and George mentioned earlier, data became much more accessible. People were just, we'll do whatever it takes if you can help us be profitable. And so, they're running out of business. It's as simple as that. And so they're more amenable to giving you their data. They're more amenable to trying pilots and use cases. Regulations became looser. So even the government is being more helpful in that regard. And talent became much more available, which is a point that Johnny raised earlier. And I think on top of all of that, there was this big spotlight on all the things that were going wrong, right? So we were in this delicate balance of things barely working. And COVID came and suddenly, shone a spotlight on like, you have this big gap right here, you have this big gap right there. And that made the value proposition much clearer to all of our customers.
That's awesome. So we're running a little bit behind, so I want to go a little bit quickly. Some of you have addressed my next question, but think about it from your customer perspective, right? They probably perceived your product or offering in a pre-COVID way, right? And then all of a sudden, COVID came up. And is there anybody that want to address the contrast of how their customers are really perceiving their product in an incremental way, whether negative or positive, because of COVID?
I'd be happy to take that, George. Just quickly, I guess, in the interest of time. I mean,
George,
can you hear me?
We hear you. I think this time it's George's fault.
George Akiki, sorry. So hopefully everybody else can hear me. I mean, how did customers perceive virtual assistants pre-COVID? It was really, it was really perceived as a call deflection play, right? It was perceived as a way to minimize the number of calls that are making it to a contact center, of reducing servicing costs. And with every one of our deployments of Kasisto, right, we've been able to show tangible outcomes around this specific KPI, right? So we talk about containment rates of over 85% with every one of our virtual assistant. And that simply means that we're essentially able to answer 85% of questions by the VA without having to require a handover to an actual agent. And this effectively has led many of our clients to have essentially call volumes into their call centers that are reduced by as much as 50%, right? From launching Kai and having a successful virtual assistant on their website. But you can't really think about the value of virtual assistants only in the context of a call deflection tool, because really ultimately what we also want to do is improve overall customer experience, right? And we want to be able to demonstrate that, and we have been able to demonstrate that, for example, with improved digital engagements on the websites and on the portals and on the mobile apps of customers that have deployed Kai with up to 4x. So, I guess, in terms of the change in perception, for a long time, despite all of this, virtual assistants were really considered nice to have, right? And that mindset with COVID is really changing. It's really shifting to, with the collapse of the contact center, it's really shifting to an imperative, as many folks have said, as an imperative from a business continuity perspective. You have to be able to service your customers, and you have to be able to do it on good days and on bad days, and that's where VAs come in.
Great. Anyone else has maybe something to add on this one before I move to the next question?
Yeah, I want to quickly complement that on the robotics side. I touched on this a little bit from the food side earlier. With robotics, it's a little bit similar as well in terms of, as George mentioned, now it's become essential and necessity for business continuity as opposed to a nice to have. And in the context of robotics, just think about the factories that are on lockdown right now. They're sitting there with machines running OPEX costs on their owners, and nothing's happening. Now think on that in the context of Amazon, for instance, right? Where not only do you have that, but you also have, I don't know how many million people depending on you and your operations for getting essential food products, getting essential medical products, and things like that. And so I think really the incentives just drastically changed from optimizing something that was working well or okay-ish to this is a must-have that we need to ensure continuity of our business.
Great. Okay, let me move to next question. Maybe I want to ask this to Johnny first and see if anybody else wants to add. Johnny, let's back up a bit. Are there any new opportunities being created in your sector post-COVID? If you look down 18 months to 2 years when everything goes back to normal, supposedly, are there new opportunities that you can see have been created in your sector?
Yeah, absolutely. One, Twitter CEO just announced that Twitter employees can now work from home permanently, right? So again, and the appreciation of this digital connection, good or bad, is now at all-time highs, I should say. So there's absolutely opportunities to capitalize. Now, one thing I want to mention, there is sort of near-term post-COVID and long-term post-COVID that I do want to touch on. Near-term post-COVID, I think the telecom operators, especially the wireless operators, have a big role to play. The name of the game now is minimizing disruption, right? So in that process, mobility is basically the biggest impact for us today. You can't go out in a mask, you can only go out and stay so close, you can't get into the store, you have to wait for capacity. So mobility is going to change, and obviously with that, mobile communications and mobile connectivity is going to dramatically change. I think of a use case of contact tracing, which is a big topic of discussion now, which is the process of making sure that you can trace every touch point of a person so that if there is an identified case, trace them back to everybody they've contacted and whatnot. I don't know what the use cases are today. We can all intuitively think of some, but obviously there's tons of those from a mobility standpoint, in a sense. And to touch on that, the ante is being up significantly for the telecom operators in terms of the services they're supporting now. You know, it's moved on from there's leisure and business to now all of it is mixed up in the same places forever, right? I don't think things will go back to pre-COVID normal from a way we do business, how we conduct business from home. That's, you know, people are going to realize that things can be done in different ways, and they're just going to continue that way. So there are opportunities. I think there's plenty of opportunities, and it's a matter of who's going to capitalize on them, right? The telecom industry could either continue to be sort of a mediator between the innovative applications and content providers, or they could actually try to take a major step into becoming value-added services over the top applications and capitalize on it for sure.
Wow, all that, and you didn't mention 5G once.
Well,
no, that's good. You're not using cliches. Anybody else wants to take a shot at this question about, again, post-COVID, any new innovation or opportunities, I should say, that you see?
I'm happy to take it. Yeah, I mean, honestly, you know, there's no doubt that there's a lot of opportunities for many in the, you know, the customer servicing space, right? As a result of this pandemic, I mean, organizations are forced to act, operating models are being rethought. You know, just recently, actually, there was an interesting quote from the CEO of Microsoft on their earnings calls, where he said that we've seen 2 years worth of digital transformation in 2 months, right? And that's really the pace at which organizations are really being forced to adapt and you know, as a result of this, right? And I certainly think that AI virtual assistants are going to be one beneficiary of this dynamic, right? You know, in terms of where you know, that industry is going, I think inevitably over time, AI you know, will play a bigger part in the overall customer engagement and servicing model. Whether it's customer-facing assistants like, you know, Kai, you know, these will only improve. They will become you know, they will be able to have richer conversations. They will have more personalized conversations. But that doesn't mean that the humans will be completely, you know, put out of the equation, right? You know, we'll probably have agents that, you know, that job function of live agents will shift. You have repetitive tasks that are done by the likes of Kai, and then you'd have agents becoming essentially the problem solvers, answering the most difficult, the most complex problems, and then that will probably require another slew of assistants or VAs that are tailored for those agents, right? For those humans and internal facing VAs. And so, you know, really there's opportunities across this whole value chain when you look at it end to end, right? That will be created as a result of this, right? You know, there's definitely no shortage of that.
So let me ask a question now to the person who's actually eradicating the use of humans in businesses. Let me go to Anthony right now.
I didn't realize that was me.
Anthony, from your vantage point, and again, with the robotics in mind, what are some of the innovations in AI that are expected to yield good results and cool solutions in the future? It's a little bit different take on my previous question. It's sort of in general, not necessarily food industry. What are you hearing in the robotics world that are some big innovations coming down the road that you think are going to be so cool? Like we're going to really see cool solutions coming out of it.
Yep, for sure. And just to touch on your point super quickly, the whole point is for robots to work with people, not replacing them, enabling them. Think of it as a microwave. Does your microwave mean you shouldn't be in the kitchen?
Famous last words.
But to address your question, I think there's a lot of very interesting things coming together in robotics, and particularly on vision, signal processing, and manipulation or controls. And I'll talk about each one of them very briefly. in terms of vision, we're being able to do things, or machine vision is able to open new doors that were just simply not possible before. And when we say machine vision, your immediate reaction would be to say like, oh, you can recognize shapes and what these objects are and so on. But I think that's really only scratching the surface, right? The power of machine vision is being able to show an object, and then the camera or the system or the AI or what have you knows where to hold that object, right? And I think this is really where we start talking about the interesting applications of these things. And now we go from just an abstract image to recognizing what things are, to going the next step and figuring out how to interact and engage with them in the real physical world. So that's on the vision side, and I think this is really huge, and people underestimate where we are in that space, right? This is all very recent, and it's happening at a very, very fast pace. On the control side, similarly, if people remember, the Amazon picking challenge is not that old, right? And the Amazon picking challenge, for people who don't know, is about a robot being able to grasp a random object out of a tote or a box. And right now, when this started a decade or so ago, basically no one was able to do it, right? Amazon was paying millions of dollars for people who can successfully grasp a certain number of unknown objects before. And today we're also pushing that boundary in the robotics world on whether with us at DexI, where we can manipulate things that deform, but also in other places like construction, surgery, where you have surgical robots that are able to manipulate human tissue with unprecedented level of detail. And all of that is also happening at a very, very fast pace. And I think that the third topic that I touched on earlier in terms of systems or integration or signals really is, how do you bring all of this together, right? How do you create a system that can see things and understand them, listen to what people are saying through natural language processing or other cues, like when someone says ouch when they're scared or when they have a problem, right? We humans have a lot of intuition, and AI and machines don't. And I think now we're at this stage where we can pull a lot of different signals together to create or to emulate that intuition, which would let machines or robots or any AI-powered device do things that we were for a long time considering very human, right? And I think this is really like, it's very interesting that the COVID-19 crisis happened now, because as was said on this panel right now, 2 years of advancements are happening in 2 months, right? And so just imagine what that means in the context that we just talked about of robotics, right? And where we're heading.
This is great. I was actually going to ask you guys, and I think you sort of answered directly. I was going to ask, what recommendations do you have for fresh graduates coming out of school who studied computer science and maybe AI? What areas should they go into? But we're running out of time, and I think you almost answered it, right? Some of the cool areas where they should focus on. What we didn't discuss today, and maybe that was not appropriate, is what are some of the industries that are being hit even using AI today? I keep joking and I say, maybe cruise ship reservation type software or whatever. But anyway, we didn't address that today. We are coming to sort of the end of the main session, and we're going to move now to the Q&A session. So bear with us. We're probably going to take 15 minutes to do that. And Najib Khouri Haddad, can you please now take it from here and maybe walk us through some of the questions that have been asked online?
Yeah, hi everyone. I do encourage you to submit questions on the Q&A button here menu. We have 3 questions so far. First, from Alessandro Zreib for Anthony. Do you think that restaurants are going to have different priorities today in terms of budget spending? Do you think this crisis will hurt your business because of lack of capital, or help it?
Yep, these are both excellent questions. Thanks, Alessio. On the first question, if we take a step back and think about how or where restaurants spend their money, or the cost side of the restaurant business, it's roughly a third on food costs, a third on labor, and a third on overhead. That's been the rule of thumb for a few decades now. On the food cost, any changes you make there will either directly affect your menu, or will mean that you have to go through lower quality foods. Some restaurants are now offering limited menus to address that, but generally you can't reduce spending all too much there because it affects the quality of the experience, right? People go there to eat your food. At the same time, the food industry or the value chain is getting a lot of heat and is facing a lot of difficulties there. So if anything, we expect the food cost to go up and not down. Overhead is largely related to, you can streamline operations in some sense, but it's largely also related to the real estate costs that you have. And again, these are also going up, not down. And that's historical trend that's been going for some time now. And so you're left with really the biggest cost driver, which is labor. And when you look at it that way, you need labor, right? You need people to make your food. Otherwise, what are you doing in your restaurants? And so when you look at it from that standpoint, you get to the conclusion that restaurants have to save on labor. And one of the ways they do that is through automation, which is why I actually believe that that the crisis helps automation, doesn't discourage it. Now, your second specific question on restaurants being able to buy that automation, right? Because not only do you, let's say we agree that restaurants need it, it doesn't mean that they can pay for it. And here, I think the onus is a little bit on the automation provider side to kind of remove that friction, right? And what we're doing as Dexai, as an example, is we lease all the equipment on our end. So we bear the financial cash flow risk. And we offer our solution as a pay-as-you-go model exclusively, meaning we tell restaurants, we understand you don't have cash to pay for any of this. We will only charge you once you sell the food that the robot makes. This way, you don't have to pay anything before adopting the automation solution. And I believe that's one way to encourage adoption of automation solutions, but obviously there are many others, and we need to constantly think about them.
Thanks, Anthony. Next question. What is your, maybe this is for Johnny, if you can take it. What's your view on the impact of AI and machine learning, particularly bots, on jobs?
And Najib, let me just interrupt just so that recognize who asked those. The previous question was asked by Alessio Zreib, and this one is by Mark Sfair, right?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, I do believe that there will be an impact to jobs. There's no way around it. It's labor arbitrage, really, in a lot of cases. For us, I mean, the way we position it also is that we are expanding the capacity for humans to execute these tasks. There's no question about it. But at some point, our hope is that you will need less and less to a point where you will be able to cut costs in terms of job availability. Now, in our space, we're usually working with highly skilled, highly technical resources where there's always value that they can bring in other places. But in terms of the positions that especially where we call repetitive task execution that takes place, the days are numbered for those kinds of things, in my opinion. Ultimately, whether it's us or somebody else, somebody will automate away a lot of these tasks. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. Again, I mean, in our space, since these are highly skilled individuals, there's always other areas of higher value that they can contribute. But ultimately, again, call centers, chatbots are getting better, virtual assistants are getting better. Anthony's space in food, there's absolutely labor arbitrage there. There's no question about it. I do believe it will have a negative impact on jobs that are lower skill. There's no question about it.
Okay, thanks, Johnny. Last question I have here is for George. Which chatbot platform you recommend besides Microsoft and Google?
Well, if you're a bank, the answer is definitely Casisto. That's an easy one. But no, I mean, jokes aside, I mentioned Google's Dialogflow. I mentioned Power VA from Microsoft. Obviously, the third one in that trio would probably be Lex from Amazon. These are kind of like general purpose platforms for building virtual assistants, right? And they work well. They work well, I guess, if you're if you can provide the training data, if you have the skills to build the conversational flows yourself. But so there is that category of virtual assistant or of platforms, if you will, to build your own VA. And then there's others like Kasisto that are more domain focused, industry focused, and that come with effectively the prepackaged product, but also with the tools to customize it, to tailor it, and to extend it, right? And so it's really it's a difficult question to ask. I mean, there's really a broad spectrum of options there, and it really depends on what you're trying to achieve and how.
Okay, thanks, George. No more questions. I mean, George, back to you.
Yes, thank you, Najib, and thank you again for everyone for attending the session. Special thanks to the panelists. If you missed part of this webinar, we will post the recording in 48 hours, and please stay tuned to other webinars, announcement coming soon. I want to just do a cheap plug here. We're going to do one on 5G. It's going to be very interesting soon. And stay healthy and be safe, and thank you for
one more question that came.
Oh, go ahead.
We take it. George or Johnny from Joe Wehby. Can you explain the process of undertaking a POC, proof of concept, and how do you show business value?
Around a virtual assistant?
Go for it.
Yeah, I'm happy to take it. Yeah, I mean, you know, the process of showing value ultimately comes down to understanding the business outcomes that you're trying to achieve, right? And you know, as I said, traditionally the business outcomes have been around reducing servicing costs by containing calls, right? You know, it's been around driving engagement, digital engagement, and you know, driving potentially also revenue generating experiences as well. So somebody that's asking you, how do I open an account, or can you help me apply for a credit card? These are kind of like, obviously they lead directly into your funnel of leads, right, as a company. And so as soon as you just understand those, I guess those three business drivers, and you can understand the value that a VA will bring to each one of these, you can start pulling together a deployment of a VA that is essentially in a pilot environment, and that's measuring value against those three things, and pulling together the business case for that. And yeah, that's probably the best way of starting with essentially a pilot that leads to a broader enterprise full commercial deployment to all of your customers.
I know that Johnny, all he does is POCs, so you might take a shot at this, Johnny.
We do a few of them. Yeah, I mean, proving value is always an interesting question. Actually, quite honestly, in the last year and beyond, we've spent a ton of effort and put a lot of investment in minimizing the friction required in order to get what we call the cost of value, minimizing it for our customers, right? Customers get interested, but as soon as it comes to them spending the time and money it requires for them to try out your product, and especially in our space, it's not easy and it's not cheap. It's not a matter of, it's not, you don't download an app and it works. There's integrations, there's things to do. But in terms of what the process is, we've gotten very, very good at identifying exactly where we need, what the touch points are, and setting up the processes required in order for us to go there and minimize the effort required on customers' behalf. One of the challenges we run into when it comes to POCs is obviously we're working with very sensitive data for customers. In a lot of cases, that prevents us from taking on as much as we would like to, especially, let's say, as a SaaS product, for example, where we own the infrastructure, we can host it, just send us the data and we're good, we're done. That's ideally how we'd like to do it. But the closer we get to the customer, the more there's regulations and hurdles and hoops to jump through to get there. But the process is typically, as George said, defining the business value that needs to be achieved, identifying the stakeholders and the assets that need to be managed, and then plug into the right places and minimize the friction in the process.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Again, thank you for attending this, and stay healthy, be safe. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.